We now come to the debate on beer taxation and pubs. And this is the first of our two debates under the auspices of the Backbench Business Committee. Those debates both to take place today. To move the motion in relation to beer taxation and pubs, I call Mr. Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that this House has considered beer taxation and pubs. I'm delighted to have secured, alongside the Honourable Lady, the member for Stoke-on-Trent North, and my honourable friend, the member for Ribble Valley, this important backbench debate. And I'm grateful to the Backbench Business Committee for allocating time. In the short time that I have available, I hope to set out a compelling case for why the Minister should recommend to his colleague the Chancellor that he should cut beer duty in future budgets, should reform business rates, and should continue to look at new ways of reducing the disproportionate tax burden on pubs and breweries. Representing a Black Country constituency as I do, and as chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Beer Group, which is the largest backbench all-party group in this House, I know what an important issue it is for many of our constituents. My own Dudley South constituency is home to three very distinct and individual brewers. There's Bathams, dating back to the 1860s, Black Country Ales, a much more recent and fast-growing brewery, and Marpardo's, one of the original Camera brewers. Of course.
I'm extremely grateful for him giving way, and can I congratulate him on the great work he does as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Beer Group, which, like many other members, I'm a member. But does he not agree that, whilst it's very welcome that the government extended rate relief to pubs, that it is disappointing they didn't also extend it to small music venues, which often are also places where people drink the occasional beer?
Well, of course, the extension in rate relief, business rate relief, was part of support for high streets in particular, but also, as he says, community pubs. And so I think there is a particular value, but I certainly wouldn't be opposed to the kind of measures to which he's referring. When we last debated beer duty in this House in Westminster Hall in October 2017, I said that there were 75 pubs in my constituency. Now I'm afraid there are only 73 pubs. Now that, despite my very best efforts...
Try harder. Try harder.
A decline... Please.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way. Would he not agree with me? He talks about disappearing pubs in his constituency. You don't actually have to be a drinker to enjoy the benefits of... Joe Cox, our late, much-missed friend, talked about the loneliness agenda. I'm a non-drinker, but I'm very upset that we're losing the Goldsmiths Arms in East Acton. It's been there since 1826 when it was a coaching inn. 2,180 people have signed the petition, but it does feel under this government often people power and planning law are in conflict, and greedy developers often have too much power on their side.
Well, I mean, I would caution against trying to turn this into a party political issue, because although pubs are still, the number of pubs is still reducing, and it is reducing at a far too high rate. It is a rather slower rate than was the case before 2010. So there are obviously a number of factors that lead to pub closures, some of which more in the control of government and public authorities than others. Where government can act to slow down, stop and reverse pub closures, I'd very much encourage them to do so.
The honourable friend give way.
I will give way behind me first to my right honourable friend.
I'm most grateful to him for giving way. Does he agree with me that the closure of a public house often has a far more devastating effect in a rural area where the pub is the centre and heart of the community, often acting as a shop, a music venue, a tavern to the local people who live there?
My right honourable friend, of course, is quite right, and I will speak about the particular importance of rural community pubs later, but of course even in our towns and our high streets, our pubs are often absolutely key to local identity, and we're now in a position, I think, where more people give direction by pubs than probably by road names. I did promise my right honourable friend I would give way, and then I will
very grateful to my honourable friend who's making a superb speech, as always. And on this point about declining the number of pubs, of course, we shouldn't forget that one area of enormous growth in the industry over the last 10 years is the proliferation of craft brewers. I'm sure every single member here would have an excellent craft brewery in their constituency, and they often run tap houses. So does my honourable friend recognise the real importance of the small brewers' tax relief to the growth of craft brewers, and will he make that part of his discussion with the Chancellor and the Treasury?
My right honourable friend, I think, preempts a later part of my speech, and the honourable lady for Stoke-on-Trent North is similarly indicating that she may just touch upon this a little bit later. But yes, the rise in the number, the variety of smaller and particularly craft breweries over the last decade and a half has been one of the key features of the sector, and of course is partly down to the success of the small brewers relief, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be. I did promise the honourable gentleman that I would give way.
Grateful to him, and my congratulations to those other people in securing this important debate. He's absolutely right about rural pubs. I think something that's often overlooked, however, is the importance of the last pub on a council estate in many of our towns. And on many of those estates, the last pub has closed, and it's a huge impact on the facilities that are available for people to get together. So whilst I support entirely what he says about rural pubs, let's make sure we don't forget that issue of council estates.
Can I just help? Mr Perkins, you want to speak? We're on the 5-minute limit. If we're going to intervene, I don't want to have to drop people down, but I want everybody to have the same fair chance. Mike Wood, less interventions on those who are speaking will help us all.
I'll consider myself duly reprimanded, Mr Deputy Speaker. Suffice to say that, once again, I strongly agree, and having seen within the Black Country the impact of derelict pubs of varying sizes, standing monument on, within housing estates and in town centres. One last intervention, and then I must move on, otherwise Mr Deputy Speaker will shout at me.
I'm really grateful to the honourable gentleman and congratulate him on securing this debate and the powerful speech he's making. I just wanted to pick up on that point of pub closures. The Black Bull pub in Barnsley East closed last year, and the 250-year-old building is due to be demolished. Does he share the sadness, and what does he think we can do to improve the situation?
Well, I share the sadness whenever a well-used pub closes for any reason, and of course particularly where that is a heritage building within our towns, cities and villages, it has a particular impact on the community. Last autumn, 116,000 people up and down the country signed the Long Live the Local campaign, many of them emailing their MPs. It was launched by Britain's Beer Alliance, very quickly garnered public support from licensees, from beer drinkers, many more. And I know that the success of that petition and everybody who united behind that campaign was absolutely pivotal in persuading the Treasury of the need for action to support beer and pubs. And I'm delighted that the Chancellor listened to those passionate calls and froze beer duty once again, because the beer and pub sector is vital in our country. Nearly 900,000 people up and down the United Kingdom rely on the industry for work. 43% of those are younger people, aged 16 to 24, and more than half of them are women. Supporting the pub trade, fantastic way to reduce youth unemployment, but also to develop skills amongst young people. This House saw firsthand the impact that apprenticeships across the hospitality sector have and the opportunities available during the apprenticeship showcase in National Apprenticeship Week. One more.
I thank my honourable friend that he's making an extremely good point about the opportunities for people in this industry. Does he agree with me that this is one of those industries where you can quite literally start behind the bar and end up as the chief executive or the chairman of quite a big company?
My honourable friend's spot on, and when I was helping judge the pub chef and young pub chef of the year at this time last year, we spoke to a number of people who were still not yet in their mid-20s, who were not only running their own kitchen, but in a number of cases, were now running multi-million-pound turnover businesses in their own right. And there are very few other sectors where people at a young age can go into an industry with next to no start-up capital and have those opportunities for rapid career progression to be running their own business. Brewing is also a true success story for homegrown British manufacturing. Staggering 82% of all beer consumed in this country is made in this country, and we have over 1,800 breweries in the UK, 149 in the West Midlands alone. In my Dudley South constituency, the sector accounts for 1,068 jobs, 315 of them under 25, contributes over £34 million in gross value added to the Treasury's coffer, for which I'm sure my honourable friend the Minister is very grateful. Nationally, the sector adds nearly £23 billion to the UK economy and contributes almost £13 billion in taxation to the Treasury. Some of us would argue that is a little bit disproportionate. £1 in £3 spent in pubs goes straight into Treasury coffers, with an average for every pub in the country of £140,000 being raised for the taxman every year. So I strongly welcome the Chancellor's announcement of a review of small brewers' relief for the reasons that my right honourable friend.
Small breweries like St Peter's in my constituency have a proven track record in exporting their beers all around the world. They can expand, open up new markets and create more jobs if export volumes were excluded from small breweries' relief. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the Treasury should do this exclusion as part of their review of small breweries' relief?
I thank my honourable friend for raising this point, and I think it is one that certainly needs to be considered. I understand the concerns that the Treasury has in terms of risk of fraud and opportunities to actually enforce it, and particularly legality at the moment under the current European duty framework. But on beer duty has in the past divided this House, but there's now a general agreement on all sides that it is already high and we certainly need to avoid rises. When the hated beer duty escalator was introduced by Gordon Brown, beer duty rose by a staggering 42%. And at the same time, beer consumption in the UK fell by 16% overall and by nearly a quarter in our pubs. Almost 7,000 pubs called time for good, and more than 58,000 beer-dependent jobs were lost. This was a very expensive policy failure, and the price was paid by beer drinkers and publicans and employees alike. So I'm delighted that as a country, we're now, of course, drinking more beer, but we're also paying less tax on it as a proportion of the cost. However, the amount of this beer being sold in pubs continues to fall, and whilst the rate of pub closures has slowed, as I said in answer to a previous question, they're still closing at a disturbing rate. I will very briefly, I can see.
I thank you very much for giving way and commend him on the speech he's making. Pubs are very important in my constituency, and the brewery Shepherd Neame is the largest employer, as well as I see colleagues nodding, the producer of excellent beer. But lower alcohol beers are becoming increasingly popular. So on the subject of duty rates, does he agree with me that there may be a case for looking at the threshold at which you get duty relief for lower alcohol beers?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I know that my honourable friend for Waveney would also agree with St Peter's being a major advocate of this argument as well. Clearly, the European Union, within their beer duty framework, is in the process of changing those thresholds, and I would hope that the Treasury, regardless of what form of Brexit we end up with, will make sure that at the very least we follow those mechanisms that are already in place, amending the threshold for low alcohol level to a threshold where it's rather more viable for brewers to produce at that strength, encouraging people down from 4-point-something to around 3%. Is better for people's health. If we can make sure that it's fiscally better for the brewer as well, then so much the better. Now, as Cameron's made clear, one of the opportunities as we leave the European Union, and we know from last night's discussion that there's an element of disagreement as to what should happen next, but one of the opportunities is we are able to take back control of our excise duty regime. And so this gives the Chancellor an opportunity to look afresh at how we tax beer in pubs in particular, how we can use fiscal measures to help pubs thrive, to support responsible drinking, and to redress the imbalance, the competitive disadvantage that our community pubs are against particularly supermarkets that are able to stack them high, sell them below cost, and use them as a loss leader. Of course.
It's particularly on that point. Does he therefore agree with Colin Shavels of Balance North East, who commissioned an independent survey of publicans, that it is cheap alcohol, cheap booze in the supermarkets that is dangerous to our pubs and causing more closure than alcohol duty?
Well, I think there are a range of factors. I think beer duty certainly is part of it, but business rates is a massive factor in the pressures affecting our pubs. And for these pubs to flourish, to remain the beating hearts of our communities and to continue to compete as businesses, then they need the investment that comes and is only possible if the tax burden is kept at a sensible level. So I really can't. I ought to have finished by now. Now, the 3 duty cuts and 2 beer tax freezes that we've seen under successive Conservative Chancellors, they've secured thousands of pub jobs on hundreds of pubs. They've boosted confidence in our brewing and pub businesses, and those businesses have continued to invest in the sector. They've increased beer sales, boosting the Treasury's total tax take from beer. This is a win-win situation, and I would encourage the Minister and the Chancellor to win even more by giving us a fair deal on beer taxes. So I would ask the Minister to urge the Chancellor to go further. Hard-pressed UK beer drinkers still pay 40% of all of Europe's beer duty, despite only drinking 12% of the beer consumed. Now, 12%, you could argue, possibly not yet enough. Crucially, 7 in 10 alcoholic drinks sold in pubs are beer. By helping British beer, you're helping British manufacturing, you're also helping our community pubs. But we do have to address business rates. We need fundamental reform. The relief announced in the budget last autumn, enormously helpful. I think it's about 80% of pubs benefiting, but they're still hugely overtaxed. Despite only making up about 0.5% of total business turnover, our pubs represent about nearly 3% of all business rate payments. So beer and pubs are a great British success story. We can help them to prosper and to succeed if we can spare industry and consumers from the burden of high beer duty and unfair business rates and use our duty framework to support our community pubs. I thank the Backbench Business Committee for finding the time, thank members for supporting this debate, look forward to the Minister's response.
The question is, as on the order paper, with a 5-minute limit, Ruth Smeeth.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate my friend and chairman of the APPG for Beer, the member for Dudley South. It is an honour to serve as his deputy and the Labour lead in our House on the issue of beer. I must declare an interest, not in my declaration of interest, but that I am the honourable member for the Titanic Brewery, the best small brewer in the United Kingdom. I think I'm going to be heckled, Mr Deputy Speaker, throughout this by my honourable neighbour. Titanic has benefited hugely from the small brewers relief, which I'll touch on in a moment. But I'd like to put on record my thanks and for the support that I received, but also for the investment they've made in my community, to Keith and Dave Bott, who have ensured that small brewers have had a voice in this place and others for many years. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is a pleasure to talk about a B word that has nothing to do with Brexit. I think we can all agree that we have spent enough time for a little while. So instead, I'd like to talk about the value of pubs to our society. And whilst the sector supports more than 1 million jobs in the country, and we heard various statistics from my honourable friend, the reality is that we need to touch on the other aspects that the pub sector delivers for our community, both in terms of loneliness and the impact on, especially on older gentlemen with somewhere to go, but also on the impact of our communities. I will give way.
That my honourable friend has allowed me to intervene. Do they recognise that social isolation in older groups, that it's important that we link community pubs with craft breweries in our own constituencies, such as Loch Lomond Brewery and the Lennox Brewery in my own, because what we do is we reduce social isolation and we reduce consumption of alcohol at home.
I think there is a huge opportunity for us to have a debate about the benefits of off-licence versus on-licence, and the support that you get when you actually enter a pub, and the responsibilities of the landlord, and that is especially the case when we talk about loneliness. But I will give way.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I was stirred to action by the words used by my good friend, member for Stoke-on-Trent, who used the word older gentleman, and I qualify. But I am not lonely. But I want to say one thing. The way we keep our pubs alive in our community is for people to visit the pubs. And if we get more people going to the pubs, then they will live longer. And I think that's very important. And that, by the way, includes me.
Thank you very much, and I thank my friend for his intervention. I have to say that I think a pint of steerage from the Titanic Brewery will definitely help you live longer. There is also the value of community and what our pubs do and how they bring everyone together, whether it is fundraising for local charities, whether it's increasing the awareness of some illnesses, or whether it's just everyone coming together on a Sunday evening. Pubs are at the heart of our communities when other institutions are falling away. I will give way.
Can I congratulate her on making an excellent speech about the importance of pubs at the heart of our communities. We're losing so many of those community pubs because of the terrible imbalance for pubs in business, in our business rates regime. So I'm sure she will come on to it, but does she agree with me that that disparity in the payment of 2.8% to the entire business rates bill compared to 0.5% of turnover, an overpayment of £500 million a year, desperately needs addressing?
I will be touching on taxation in just a moment. I just want to also say about pubs and the role on British culture and society, because it is a core part of who we are. When everyone looks at, when people enjoy coming to the UK for tourism, an issue we need to discuss even more as we head towards Brexit, there is nothing more English on occasion, but also British, than holding a pint. And I just want to say that tonight at the Sentinel Business Awards, which I can't attend because of the debates in this House, everyone will be toasting their awards with a pint of local beer, because it is part of our community and it is part of our culture. So I'm afraid I've run out of time for interventions. In terms of the impact of taxation and the sector, Minister, I think there are some stark figures that we need to acknowledge that were touched on by my honourable friend for Sheffield Heeley. Amazon UK paid £4.5 million in corporation tax last year. Black Sheep Brewery, chaired by the wonderful Andy Slee, a constituent in Stoke-on-Trent, paid £8 million in beer duty. Amazon UK has a turnover of £1.98 billion. Black Sheep Brewery has a turnover of £19 million. Minister, there is an issue here. In 2016, eBay UK paid £1.6 billion in corporation tax. Titanic Brewery paid 25% of their turnover to HMRC. That's £2 million. When you look at business rates and the disparity that was touched upon, when there was the rate evaluation last year, Titanic Brewery's pubs' rateable value went up by 20% across Staffordshire. The Amazon warehouse in Stoke-on-Trent fell by 10% in rateable value. This is a complete disparity. It is simply not fair for online and offline businesses. Breweries and pubs cannot move, nor would we want them to move, off the high street. We've touched on small business relief, but I'm going to run out of time. All I can ask the Minister at this point is that can he please look at the CBER requests in terms of the impact of changes. We are at a point of a cliff edge for stopping investment for smaller brewers being able to go to the next level up unless this is smoothed out. And I'd also like to reiterate the invitation I gave to the Minister earlier this year to come and have a pint with me at Titanic Brewery at his earliest convenience.
Nigel Evans.
Much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I declare an interest as President of the All-Party Beer Group, and it's great to follow my honourable friend, the member for Stoke-on-Trent North. I don't think she quite heard, but when she told us she was the MP for Titanic Brewery, I did shout, I suspect she's sunk a few of those. Well, I know I have, so...
Okay, the first time you said it, come on, Nigel.
I know, well, on that, I have to say, as the Deputy Speaker knows, I live next door to a pub. I mean, you can't have much more commitment than that. I really feel at times I should pay my council tax to the pub rather than in the house I live next door. And indeed, when I celebrated my 50th birthday, it was in that pub, and I welcomed the Deputy Speaker and his wife, Catherine, to that pub. And only a few weeks ago, I was in Edinburgh at the Caledonian Brewery. An absolutely superb brewery, sank a few pints of theirs as we were celebrating Wales on their march to the Grand Slam. So all in all, it's great to have a debate in this place where we're all coming together, isn't it? Rather than knocking six bells out of one another. But the pub is such an important focal point for people. I live in a rural village, and it's great when people can get together. And so much that these pubs do on raising funds for numerous charities, or indeed sporting groups coming together, whether it's darts teams, football teams, whatever it happens to be. People coming together. Of course, I'll give way to my honourable friend. I know she's trying to get it.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way, and for him and his colleagues for actually getting this debate together. The debate is about pubs and about taxation and pubs and beer, but also there's a wider aspect of this, which is about the community hub. It's Mother's Day on Sunday. Our pubs will be full of people celebrating there. There will be dining and they will be drinking. They'll be having a great time. Would you agree with me that the loss of these pubs, it would be a real detriment to our society?
Absolutely. With Mother's Day coming up, and I hope many people will be taking their mums out and grandmothers out to pubs throughout their communities in order to thank them for being their mums. You don't need another excuse than that, do you? But it would be wonderful, and you hardly pass a pub these days without a board outside that it's informing people Mother's Day's coming up and to book early to avoid disappointment. And there are so many occasions when one can go to a pub and celebrate. In fact, any day with a Y in it will do, as far as I'm concerned, because I do believe that these pubs do bring people together. And the best way to sort of look at that is when you go to a village where the only pub in the village is closed. And it sort of tears the heart out of that village in many ways. And I know the pressures that these pubs are facing, whether it is the business rates, which are crippling on some of these small pubs, but also the environmental standards, which is quite right that they have to meet, an investment in new fridges or whatever it happens to be. And of course, these pubs in themselves are generating a lot of economic activity. So it's not just the sale of the beer in itself, which is a fantastic product, but it's other economic activity there too. And if it's a rural area, it's amazing that they're providing jobs in a rural area where these jobs can be really scarce, and particularly for younger people who are perhaps at college and are able to be flexible with their times. This is providing them with extra income, which they badly need. Of course, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Gentleman for giving way, and he's making a wonderful speech, as I know he would on this topic he knows only too well. Can I just ask him to consider those communities have gone even further and bought their pub? The community-owned pub is a really important part now of some villages, and congratulate the Plunkett Foundation, who do an awful lot of work to tell communities how they can buy their own pub.
Yes. At times, the pressure on some of these pubs when they close, for them to be turned into a block of flats or apartments, must be immense, because there's a lot of money in housing, as we know. And for the opportunity for them to be turned into a community pub where the community come together, raise some money, and then keep that pub going. There's countless examples of them throughout the country, which mean that the community still have a focal point to come together. So I hope more publicity will be given to those sorts of opportunities. I've got 3 breweries of different sizes in my patch. I've got InBev, where they make Stella Artois, but also Thwaites' brewery, which has moved from Blackburn into the Ribble Valley. Much smaller, but it's the famous brewery with the Shire horses. So there's a lot of corporate responsibility within that company. And then Holmes Mill with the great Bowland beers as well that are brewed in the heart of the Ribble Valley too. Yes, go away, some honourable friend.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable gentleman speaks with forked tongue. I've been to the pub beside his house with him twice, 3 times. It's a wonderful pub. But he always leaves behind, when we go next door, the lady who lives in his house. She's called Alexa. He's never taken her.
Well, all I can say to that interesting intervention was that 3 times he's been to my pub, and not once has he bought me a drink. And that's the sort of friends that I know. But it is a great. I'm not mentioning Alexa. It is a great pub. It was actually the Camera pub of the year in 2013. But I've got other pubs like the Free Masons in Wizzle and also the Parker's Arms in Newton, where, of course, a lot of them rely on food offering as well. One honourable lady mentioned the fact that she doesn't drink. Well, you don't have to drink alcohol to go into these places, because there's so much more on offer. One mention has been mentioned of the taxation on beer, which is huge, £13 billion, it's massive, that's going in there. And when one considers that almost 1 million jobs are provided by that industry, and that we need to look at ways of lowering that taxation. There's something wrong when taxation goes up, people drink less, and actually less money go to the revenue, inland revenue. So it's quite a commonsensical approach to lower taxation, increase the sales, and ensure that the HMRC get more money out of it. But on the ABVs, where the taxation is high and it only drops at 2.8%, I do believe that we need to look at ways of increasing the ABV to 3.5%, which will encourage more people to drink lower strength alcohol, have a great time, and at the same time incentivising people to do that. I think it is worrying when a lot of people drink high ABVs, 5% plus, whereby I don't think drinking a pint of beer is good for your health, but drinking too much of it with higher ABV just simply isn't. So all I can say, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that tomorrow night I was due to be in a pub celebrating a big event. That big event's not happening, it's being deferred. But all I can tell you is, on May the 22nd, I hope to be saying, cheers, Brexit.
Ms McInnes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm pleased to be able to make a contribution to this very important debate and to follow the Honourable Member for Ribble Valley. And I also want to thank the Honourable Member for Dudley South for securing this debate. Now, I am particularly interested in this subject for several reasons. As a constituency MP with a medium-sized family-run brewery in my constituency, John Willie Lees, which provides employment for around 1,100 people, owns 140 pubs across the North West and North Wales, and is a major contributor to our local economy. And also, my interest is as a daughter of a landlady. My mother ran the Owen Glendower pub in Corwin, North Wales, during the 1980s, and then she was allowed to return home to the Duke of York in Hayside, Oldham, both John Willie Lees pubs. And there I spent many hours, most of them happy, helping out with bar work in the evenings and at weekends. I certainly will.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, because you've just reminded me of something. I've been to the Owen Glendower pub in Corwin when I was working at Theatre Clwyd over the way. But as an actor who had toured the country for the best part of 50 years, and I visited probably everybody's constituency, apart from perhaps the Honourable Member for Caithness, but I have visited many taverns in many towns, and much to my wife's surprise, people know me by name. But the tragedy is when you revisit a place, and we know that at some period of time there were some 50 pubs a week closing, and you revisit a place and you find that the heart of the community has been torn out because the pub has closed. In my own constituency, in the constituency of Kirby, Lesocon, 2 of the pubs are closing and they're now reopened. Should we not celebrate the fact that some publicans are being innovative and creating new business, and we should support them by taxation? I thank you.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention, and he's absolutely right, and a lot of publicans are having to be innovative in the way that they run the pubs to keep them open. I don't know when he visited the Owen Glendower. If it was in the 1980s, I may well have served him. It could well have been me that poured your pint. Cheers. Now, as the honourable gentleman has just said, pubs are at the heart of our communities. And for me, there is no greater pleasure than going down to my local on a Sunday evening. That's my night off from politics. I try. Fending off all the queries about Brexit and what on earth we are all doing in this place, as well as giving the landlord a sympathetic ear to his often expressed concerns about business rates and about the future of his pub. And the facts are simple. Pubs are closing at a rate of 2 to 3 per day. Our high streets are already struggling from the effects of bank branch closures, post office closures, and the rise of online shopping. And this is just piling on the problems in the face, I'm afraid, of this government's increasingly incoherent policy on the future of our high streets. Pubs are being taxed left, right and centre, with duty, business rates and employment taxes, as well as full VAT at 20%, whilst people are shopping online, staying at home and not coming out to socialise with others. This is not good for society, and a healthy pub is the heartbeat of its community. The Campaign for Real Ale is calling for a fundamental review of the tax system to stem the tide of pub closures. And CAMRA welcomes the government's business rate relief introduced in the 2017 budget, but said recently, just this month, that more action was needed to ensure the survival of the remaining 50,000 pubs. And I'm pleased that the Treasury is reviewing small brewers relief, which honourable members have already referred to. I look forward to hearing the results of the consultation, which closed on the 17th of March this year. And whilst small brewers relief has been helpful in the start-up of many new microbreweries, it has also meant a reduction of 1/3 of brewers like John Willie Lees in my constituency, who are squeezed between the large international brewers with huge economies of scale and smaller brewers who benefit from a beneficial duty rate. And we've already mentioned business rates do not help, and this is closing many pubs due to high costs. Certainly.
Thank you. I thank the honourable member for giving way. Do you think that it would be good if the microbrewers could agree with the family brewers a proposal for a new structure of duty relief which would have weight with the Treasury? SEBA were in contact with the family brewers last year and the talks broke down. Do you agree that if the industry could agree a scheme, that would have considerable weight?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I think that is a very sensible suggestion. I hope he's maybe fed that into the consultation. As I said, I am looking forward to hearing the results of the consultation, but I don't want to set up the small brewers against the medium-sized brewers, but I do think that we need to find a solution to this issue. Now, we've already heard from CAMRA and the British Beer and Pub Association that for every £3 spent in the pub, £1 of that goes straight back to the taxman. The beer duty freezes in 2017 and 2018 were a welcome measure after the damaging 3.9% increase in March of 2017. But British beer remains overtaxed. Britons pay nearly 40% of all beer duty paid in the EU nations, but we only consume 12% of the beer. The beer duty rate in Germany is 12 times lower than the UK rate. So a modest cut in beer duty in the next budget would create thousands of additional jobs and help ensure the sustainable future of our surviving pubs. And this has been supported by over 115,000 people who have signed the recent Long Live the Local campaign. And finally, I just want to finish with a point that was made by the Honourable Member for Ribble Valley as well, that if the government were to increase the threshold for lower strength beer to qualify for duty relief from 2.8% to 3.5%, that this would stimulate further investment in lower alcohol products and increase the range of low and no alcohol alternatives available to encourage healthy social drinking that our pubs, our community hearts so desperately need.
Mrs Anne May.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to borrow the Honourable Lady for Heywood and Middleton. And there's been touching on in this debate so far, which has been a very good-humoured debate, which is such a pleasure to be in because I'm fed up with this place at the moment. But it's been mentioned about beer duty. Can I say that I do declare an interest that the headquarters of CAMRA is in my constituency and they are at the forefront of the campaign on beer duty. But I want to focus on pub business rates because I have to say, generally speaking, these days, Madam Deputy Speaker, you don't go to the pub to get drunk. You go to the pub for so many other things, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I'm sure you do yourself. But we all like to go to the pub. Some of them run mini libraries. Some of them run toys libraries. Some of them have campaigns to support local people in need or to help charities. They have darts matches. They're a focal point for many people who have nowhere else to meet up with friends and. I think, as I say, mentioning celebrations with relatives and things as well. So a pub is so much more than just the price of the liquid in the glass, and I think we've really got to get that over, which is why I want to focus on the premises that the liquid is served in. And whilst I think a reduction in beer duty would be good, speaking as a wine drinker myself, I really want to focus on why we can keep these pubs in business for somewhere for us all to go. And I have taken part in the previous debate that we had on this in Westminster Hall, which was a very well-attended debate. And I have to say that I am trying to get to meet with the Financial Secretary of the Treasury to raise this important issue, and I have brought some of my pubs and landlords in to meet with the Minister who's on the front bench now. But the reality is they do not feel there is a real awareness of the much welcomed reduction in business rates that came through is not going to reach all the parts that other beers can't reach. It's actually, in my constituency, only reaching a mere 50% of the pubs on average. Many of the pubs have contacted me with this massive hike in business rates that they have had. They're having to cut staff or close their businesses altogether, and that cannot be the message that the government intended to send out. As many people have commented on, the beer and pub industry, of course.
Of course, this is not the first time we've had a debate about pubs. You can go back a number of years in actual fact, but we never seem to make very much progress in relation to the taxation of the pubs. And the other area that's affected pretty bad is actually working men's clubs. A lot of them are dying out now. So I think it's very important that the Treasury have a good look at this and see whether or not they can actually help pubs. Because at the end of the day, they are part of a community. Communities like a catalyst round them. So I think the Honourable Lady's on the right track, actually.
And I'm pleased he's made a very valuable intervention. I'm pleased he mentioned about the community aspect. Because, of course, some pubs threatened with closure are taken on as community assets. But the reality is it is incredibly hard to make the business case with the business rates the way they are. No matter how willing the community is, there's only so many pints of beer anyone can drink in a pub to help provide the income that that pub needs. Unless we want to encourage people to be blotto night and day, what we're having to say is the business model workable? And for many pubs, it just is not workable. And a cut of 33% in business rates with a rateable value of under 51,000 was a major step, but in areas like St Albans, it's not having the impact. A high property value areas like St Albans, it means that we're being almost totally overlooked. Many people have mentioned heritage and beautiful buildings. Pubs in my area are under a huge threat to be turned into domestic properties, and that is a real worry. They are struggling at this cliff edge, and we've got to address it now. The 2017 business rates forming for pubs use a methodology for setting the rateable value based on fair, maintainable trade. Nobody seems to understand how that works, because the rateable value is driven mainly by the pub turnover, and it takes into account property valuations. So that means even small pubs, such in St Albans, are having huge hikes in business rates because they happen to be settled in amongst much higher domestic properties. So the formula doesn't take that into account. So it penalises small business operators, and an honourable member on the backbench had mentioned about microbreweries. It also penalises the independents, which I think is a real problem, that we lose some of those quirky pubs on our high street that offer that level of interest and difference, that prove to be a huge pull for tourists that come into areas like St Albans, who appreciate pubs like the Boot, like the Fighting Cocks, many of whom have historic backgrounds and trace their way back and have architecture to match, but make them very difficult to expand or make them very difficult to increase the footfall because they're historically extremely small. So the Save the UK Pubs have compiled a very useful document that outlines the increases in pubs face, and I've given them to the Minister before, but in case he's lost them, I'll send them off to him again, because the Boot, which I have just mentioned, is a tiny heritage pub. I mean, absolutely tiny. Some people have got bigger sitting rooms than the pub I'm mentioning. They reckon they'd have to sell an additional 22,000 pints to cover the additional £51,000 in business rates they now have to pay, a 280% increase. This is unsustainable. So if the Chancellor came up with the model, he certainly wasn't looking at St Albans when he came up with it. And Chryston of the Old Fighting Cocks told me that unless we have proper reform of relevant taxes, licensing laws and duty costs, his pub will be finished. And he brought this pub, and it's a beautiful historic pub. From its name, people can work out that it went back a very long time. And it's a beautiful historic pub, but it's cost him a huge amount of personal investment to bring it back to life. So having pulled it back from despair, he expects that people in this House who get how important a pub is, it is not necessarily a drinking outlet. There are plenty of drinking outlets. A pub is family to some people, it's part of the community to many people, and a pub is something that once it is gone and turned into a posh house, as happens in my constituency, it will never come back. So can I put in a plea that the Minister does not hide behind all the different things that have been done? Can I just put in a plea to say it's not enough and we need to look at this again?
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Great pleasure to follow the honourable lady from St Albans and the call that she made at the end for more to be done to support our pubs, which is the theme of this entire debate. Pubs are absolutely crucial to our communities and certainly to my constituency. In Chesterfield we have 105 different pubs. 1,419 people are reliant on beer and pubs for their employment. And in Chesterfield alone, £15 million go into the local economy by wages paid to people who work within our pubs. But alongside the economic value that pubs provide, and we've talked about the huge tax contribution that they make, pubs are also incredibly important in terms of that social contribution. As we've been hearing from other honourable members, the extent to which when a pub closes on an estate, there isn't a focal point for the community. When you think about our soap operas, first thing you think about is the Rover's Return or the Queen Vic. They're as the hub of that community, and it's one of the things that when people come and visit our country, the first thing they want to do is to go to your local and have a pint of British ale. So I don't think we can in any way underestimate the incredibly important role it plays within our social fabric. I'll give way.
Making a wonderful speech is my friend from Chesterfield. In Otley, in Market Town of Otley, my constituency, there are two Grade 2 listed pubs, the Black Bull and the White Swan, operated by Star Pubs and Bars. They intend to stencil and ruin the heritage of those pubs. Doesn't he agree with me that that is goes against the entirety of our heritage, of the tourism that we need to engender, and also shouldn't we have more local powers to ensure that sort of thing can't happen to Grade 2 listed heritage pubs?
Well, yeah, I mean, I certainly feel very strongly that, whoever is the owner of a pub or whoever is the landlord of a pub is the custodian of that pub for their local community. And often we have seen pubs that are valued to a community that have been lost as a result of the irresponsibility or inadequacy of the people that have run them. And where pubs close, it has a huge impact on that local community. But I think sometimes we have got too bogged down with simply the numbers, but actually where pubs close is also important. We heard about the importance of rural pubs. I mentioned previously about the importance of pubs on the local estate. And sometimes, as an area in Chesterfield, very famously the Brampton Mile, 17 pubs within a single mile, and some people have attempted to visit them all in a single night. And I can't entirely remember how it ended, but it started well. All I can say is that, where you have some of those areas, and a huge number of pubs, when one closes, does it have the same impact? Maybe not so much. But where there is only one pub in an area, it is incredibly important. I think that's something we feel strongly about. 243 people in Chesterfield signed the Long Live the Local petition. And here in Parliament, I think we also all recognise how important pubs are. The honourable gentleman who started this debate is the chair of the All-Party Beer Group. I'm the chair of the All-Party Pub Group, and this year we held the first ever Parliamentary Pub of the Year competition. I was delighted so many MPs joined, and we had a fantastic array of entries. My own entry, the Chesterfield Arms, in Chesterfield, was a finalist, but ultimately defeated. And the Four Elms pub in Cardiff Central were victorious. But I think it was, in all seriousness, an event where we did come together and really celebrate the role that pubs play in our communities. Now, when it comes to tax, there's always demands on the government to, if they only taxed less, that business would do better. And I recognise the former Shadow Business Minister, the extent to which those calls are heard. But this government was elected in 2015 on a manifesto that said there was going to be a fundamental review of business rates. And I appreciate that disappeared from the 2017 manifesto, but many things are in the 2017 manifesto haven't been considered to be, they haven't considered themselves held to. And I do think that the issue of business rates and the way it is a disincentive, it's a system that disincentivises investment, whether you be in pubs or manufacturing, retail or whatever. When you make your premises better, you pay a higher tax bill, which is runs totally in the face of the sort of investment that we all want to see. So I would love to hear the government saying that they were going to do less to constantly focus on reducing the corporation tax at the expense of business rates, because corporation tax is businesses paying tax on profits that they've made, whereas business rates is a tax on owning a property. And at a time when we have pubs closing, when we have so many retail units closing, it is a taxation policy that achieves the very opposite of what government are intending to do. If I had more time, I would talk about the pubs code, but I look forward shortly to the review that the honourable lady from the business department is holding on that. But pubs are crucial in our communities. I'm delighted this debate has taken place, and may we all continue to trumpet the crucial role that they play in our communities.
Bill Grant.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Chesterfield. As a nation, we need to have a fair and balanced approach to the provision of alcoholic drinks, their sale, their taxation and the licensing of pubs. And I'll take this wee moment to put a cautionary remark in. It is well publicised that there are proven consumption levels which should not be exceeded in order to minimise the risk to our health. However, the key is to enjoy it in moderation and, best of all, to be enjoyed in your local pub. Our pubs provide a social meeting place, encouraging people to meet and converse with others in convivial surroundings. Well, the majority of pubs in Scotland are indeed convivial. Some may not be just as convivial, but they're a very important part of the infrastructure. In the United Kingdom, pubs and drink producers are also very much major employers. With approximately 900,000 employees, many of these businesses, and of course the consumer, will benefit from the rates discount of 1/3 for small retailers in England and Wales. and that starts in April 29. But can I also add that in Scotland for a number of years we have had the small business bonus, which is of great assistance, but I think neither of the schemes go far enough to assist the pubs. That's in conjunction as well, which is a good thing, with the freezing of beer and cider and spirits duty for yet another year. Yeah. Thank you very much, Chancellor. Yeah. I have previously expressed my support for the freeze on duty, given I have grants of Girvan producing whisky and Hendrick's gin, Caledonian bottlers in Cumnock, and a small air brewing company which produces wonderful and excellent real ales consumed and enjoyed by many. And these are in my constituency. But it would be remiss to be Scottish not to mention the Scottish whisky industry. Although we're on beer, it remains a great British success story, and exports are worth circa £4 billion per annum, comprising almost a fifth of the UK's food and drink exports. And duties on alcoholic drinks are forecast to raise around £12.3 billion in 2018-19. And surely, Chancellor, there's a bit of wiggle room there for a bit of kindness to the pub trade.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Certainly.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making a very good point about the whisky industry, which this government has so well supported by freezing the duty for the last 2 years. And for a constituency like mine, where we have Diageo, we've got Strathern Distillery, we've got a number of distilleries, this really does provide vital support and also support us domestically, but also with our exports. But does my honourable friend agree with me that our pubs don't just supply great drinks, they also supply fantastic food, like the Kirkstall Inn in Dunning, in my constituency, and that food can also bring families in, and combined with local music, can really make it the heart of the community.
Indeed, thank you very much for that intervention. I totally agree with you, but if I could just add to that, where pubs are great outlets for locally grown produce, and which we can be very proud of in the UK and in particular in Scotland. But as with all good news, there is a negative one. One of my local businesses raised concerns with me about the post-duty point dilution and the proposed ban on this. And I'm aware that it will hit some businesses extremely hard and cost them dearly to maintain their standards, only to fund the exchequer. Where there are methods involve this practice, and I ask that the Minister consider whether any flexibility could be applied when the legislation is drafted later this year. That said, and sadly, pubs are still closing. In villages in my constituency, in Patna, we have gone from 4 pubs to 1 over the last 15 or so years. In the village of Drongan, 3 pubs have gone to 1. And sadly, in the village of my birth, Rankingston, we had no pub for many, many years, and it's a sad reflection on the demise of these much-loved institutions. Indeed, in the last decade, almost a quarter of the UK pubs have closed. However, it is not all bad news. In the town of Cumnock, the 1906 bar in the square in Cumnock has just been refurbished and reopened as an excellent eatery and an excellent pub. And a place may well be known to Madam Deputy Speaker is the Kirkton Inn in Dalrymple, which has recently been purchased, refurbished, and is an excellent pub that breathed life back into it, and it's an excellent eatery as well. So, in both these cases, I wish the individuals every success with their business venture. But there are a raft of reasons for pub closures, including lifestyle choices, supermarket prices, and ease of purchase from a convenience store. But despite the temptation of the aforementioned, I very much enjoy supporting my local pubs, but I alone, whilst enjoying it, I can't be the saviour of all the pubs. So we all need to participate in our pubs. If we want them, we've got to use them. And again, the benchmark is consuming alcohol or beer in moderation. However, the rates aspect comes up constantly, and I've been approached by bar owners and publicans in my constituency. Is the cost of rates, despite the good small business bonus scheme, etc., there are delays, and when you appeal your rates, it's ages, it's a long, long time, and these individuals have find it hard to fund them. And CAMRA, I mentioned earlier in the debate, have long since campaigned to reduce the rates for our pubs, and that's part of the success. How often can we repeatedly punish these wee facilities in rural communities and in towns? They're like the cash cow for taxation, and a whole range of taxation. We need a serious look. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, communities still value their local pubs and eateries as part of the social fabric of our towns and villages. I recognise the work the Government has undertaken recently, but I would urge the Minister to continue to recognise the value of pubs. We can't afford to lose many more. The employment they create and the safe, supervised environment they provide for the consumption of alcohol and engaging with others. I believe it's vital that the value of pubs to the local community is reflected in the taxation applied. Thank you very much.
Adrian Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate the honourable member for Dudley South, my near neighbour, on securing this debate. He mentioned Batham's beer, of which I'm a regular consumer and supporter, and Marpado's pub, of which I'm a regular visitor. I may also say that, in fairness to all the other Black Country beers and drinking places, that the Black Country is a fantastic place for anybody who loves their beer to come there. The sheer range of craft and real ales there is absolutely phenomenal. I particularly welcome this debate because it is framed in the context of the tax regime and pubs. The first point I want to make, and many members here have spoken about the tax regime, is that yes, we do need a change in the tax regime, but alone that will not protect our pub's heritage unless it is allied with a change in the supervision and regulatory relationship between the pub tenant and the pub owning business. If I can just first of all touch on the tax regime, and members have covered most of this, there is obviously a case for looking at the alcohol duties when you have high alcoholic beers and ciders taxed at hugely different rates. That in itself is a reason for looking at them. When you have high alcohol spirits that are taxed at a relatively lower rate, that again is a reason for looking at these duties. But ultimately, I see it as the job as a Treasury to have a comprehensive review of them, designed, first of all, to promote social drinking, secondly, to sustain pubs, and of course, lastly, to sustain exchequer regular.
My friend give way.
Yes, certainly.
I thank my friend for giving way. Given that he's just touched on the fact that there's differential duty, does he agree with me that it is ludicrous that there is still a subsidy in effect for cider producers producing high levels of alcohol content when that isn't the case for beer? There needs to be a level playing field across the sector.
I agree with my honourable friend. I mean, given the increase in the consumption of cider and the increased tax revenues on it, I would have thought there was really a case to look at the relative taxation levels of the two drinks. Business rates has been mentioned. I will not go over the details of it, but we do have this ludicrous situation whereby the more you invest in your business, the higher the turnover, very often you get a huge increase in the level of business rate as well. I had one example given to me of somebody who took over a pub that had traded at 200,000, raised it to 700,000, and then found that his business rate went from 8,400 to 37,000 pounds. That he did get it reduced to 24,000, but the mere fact that you had such a big increase, then you had a revision of it, would seem to demonstrate that the process for evaluating business rate is deeply flawed. And whilst I recognise the attempts of the government to do something about it, what we really need is a very comprehensive review of business rate that, to be geared in such a way as to promote and reward investment rather than to penalise it. Yes, I'll give way to that.
Just briefly, he's absolutely right. I've had similar experiences with pubs putting in the investment and then finding themselves penalised. But then when the challenge is put in, they're saying the challenge is taking a very, very long time and it's very difficult to get an explanation as to the final figure is arrived at. There is not the transparency over the rateable system that there should be.
I totally agree with the honourable member. The process is opaque and would appear to be often perverse as well. And I think there's a big case not only for revising it, but for making the whole process far more transparent than it now is so that anybody investing in their business can get a very clear idea of what the potential financial penalties, if that's the word, would be for that investment. I want to briefly touch on the pubs code and the pub code adjudicator. My honourable friend, the member for Chesterfield, mentioned this issue. As the former chair of the BIS Select Committee and a member of its predecessor committees, time and time again we examined the issue around the relative balance of power between the pub tenant and the pub owning business, and the relatively low level of income that tenants running even the most successful pubs obtain from all their efforts relative to the revenues that were accrued from the pub owning business. And of course the pub code was agreed by the Secretary of State for Biz in the previous coalition government, and I give him credit for that, and a pub code adjudicator was appointed to act to adjudicate and to try to ensure that there was a fair balance of risk and reward between the two parties. I think it's fair to say that the appointment of Paul Newby was controversial. A lot of concerns were raised on the basis of the evidence that we're getting back from the tenants. Those concerns were well founded, and it does not seem to have affected the rate of closures of pubs whatsoever. And indeed, the number of tenants who are still finding that the reward they get from all their efforts is totally inadequate from the level of these efforts does not seem to have changed either. And so I welcome the fact that the government is about to undertake a review of the working of both that code and the adjudications. And I would point out that the essential thing is for the pubs code adjudicator to act as an adjudicator, not just as enabling a negotiation to take place between the pub code and the tenant, which actually reinforces the imbalance of power between the two of them. All too often, pub tenants find themselves not only negotiating against the pub company, but negotiating with their solicitors as well. And of course, they are not in a position to have the equivalent rate of legal advice, and so on and so forth. So I would just conclude by my remarks by saying saving the pub involves two things: a radical transformation in the taxation, but also the reinforcement of the legal protections for the pub tenant against the pub owning business.
Jamie Stewart.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Can I thank the honourable member for Dudley North for bringing this debate before us today. South, so sorry. Because this is, as other members have said, a light relief compared to the dark place we've been for far too long, let me put it that way. Much of the points that I would have made have already been made, so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to crave your indulgence and just have a little anecdote from the past. As some members know, prior to my appearing rather unexpectedly in this place, I was much involved in amateur dramatics and the local pantomime group. And I have indeed been the dame in my time. But on a Thursday night, if I go back to halcyon days of pubs, on a Thursday night, we would repair to one particularly famous old pub in my hometown. And the barman, Sandy, at 11 o'clock would say, well, well, boys and girls, well, well, I think we'll need to lock the door. And he'd turn the key in this massive great door and shut it, you see. Carry on pulling the pints. And I turned to a new member of the cast beside me at the bar, and I said, goodness me, do you think the bobbies might come knocking the door tonight? And he laughed and said, ha, I'm an off-duty police sergeant. To which caused a slight reaction around the bar. And then a voice further down the bar said, that's nothing, I'm an honorary sheriff substitute. So they were lax days, but I just tell you the anecdote. There are 2 points I do want to pick up in my brief contribution, which is this. The honourable member for Ribble, Stoke-on-Trent North, made the point that publicans and the staff are trained. and they know the danger signs when somebody's drinking too much. And as often as not, they'll refuse to serve them, or they'll get them into a taxi, get them out of the place. How much better, as the honourable member has said, is that than some lonely bloke drinking himself into a stupor on cheap white lightning or cheap wine at home? And I think all of us know that there are far too many household fires that are caused by somebody being bloated in their seat and dropping a fag down the back of the settee or whatever. So there's a safety aspect to it. Now, the other thing, the second point I make is simply this. If you or I go on holiday to Spain or Italy or whatever, well, if you're me, you fairly shortly think, well, I'll pop down the village and it's a hot day and you see a nice wee tables outside the place and you have a pint of lager. Let's just switch it the other way round. Visitors come to Highlands of Scotland and they find there are no pubs. Are you kidding? Because tourism is crucial to the Highlands of Scotland. It's the one industry, as I always say, that is actually in the long term fundamentally sustainable. But if you don't have pubs, the visit experience is going to be much impoverished, to say the very least, and the bad news is that the next year they'll think, well, I'll maybe not go to that bit again. So there is a far wider role of pubs that's not been touched on so far in this debate. And yes, absolutely, I echo all that's been said about pubs being part of the social fabric of our communities, for all the good points that I most certainly would go with.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Jolly Woodman in Chancery Lane, in my constituency, actually the nearest pub to my house in my constituency, does really quality real ale. And people come from miles around just to visit this pub. That is the sort of reaction you want from the pubs in your area.
I could not agree more, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do hope that the honourable member one day will take me to that splendid place and perhaps introduce me to the delights of the nectar. I will give way for a second. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've said enough, but he's not with us now, but as soon as I get the opportunity, I shall have the honourable member for Clacton into my constituent to introduce him to the local delights, of which there are many, and I hope there will carry on being many, because if we lose them, it's a tragedy.
Hugh Gaffney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank the member for Dudley South for organising this. First, I would like to thank my local Coatbridge brewery, the Veterans Brewery, and their success as a relevant new brewery launched on Amnesty Day in 2014, built by ex-servicemen, where I visited recently. But as someone who worked in the pub trade many years ago, for 10 years, it was the most enjoyable job from bar person to landlord. And I would like to thank my local, the Windmill Tavern, Turnoutside, because it was the customers who made my job so happy. And I would also like to thank the Gates Bar in Bellshill, where I worked part-time, where we would have many debate nights, where I'd be pulling pints and talking politics, doing multitasking. Those days were busy pubs, day and night, people out socialising and enjoying a pie and a pint. Changed days. 30 years later, where nowadays we have empty pubs and landlords struggling to compete with the off-sale market against the price of a pint and the price of socialism. Sadly as well, while we still do love our local pubs, I have also seen a change in the hotel and catering trade, where staff wages are low and where zero contracts are used and abused. And what really annoys me is where staff tips are taxed and in most cases managed poorly. So in finishing tradition, last orders, can we look at beer taxation? Can we eradicate zero-hour contracts? And can we stop taxing the tips? Thank you.
Shannon. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I didn't expect those two speeches to last just as quickly as they did. I'm sure that means I don't qualify for the extra time, I'm sure, either. But if I could, I would use that, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, but you know that. But I know by your rules you wouldn't let me, and I accept that. Can I just say, first of all, can I commend the honourable member for Dudley South for setting the scene as he did so ably and so generous in the interventions as well. Thank the Backbench Committee for selecting the issue. From the floor, I would like to be clear that I am someone that is very aware of the duty that this House has to ensure that we encourage people to sensitively drink. Our policies, taxation, legislation must carry a message that there is a sensible balance which must be achieved by those who choose to drink alcohol. It is for this reason along with others in this House, I oppose the supermarket cheap deals on alcohol. The Honourable Lady for North Tyneside referred to it, and others have as well. It's very clear to me one of the contributing factors to those who have alcohol problems, and for those people who buy too much and then imbibe too much and end up in the A&Es and in broken families due to the abuse of alcohol. I fully support my local pubs and make sure that they have that support at every corner that I can give them. And it's very clear that they contribute greatly, and I'll talk about that later on in relation to Northern Ireland, how much money they contribute to the local economy. But the local pubs for me are quite clear. You either use it or you lose it, and we cannot unfortunately have the losses that we've had over the years. However, I'm also someone who understands the benefit to drinking in a pub which is a safe local environment. Others have referred to it, where someone is able to reach over and take your keys and call you a taxi or an Uber, as the young people of the day referred to it as, when someone who can say, OK, Billy or Pat, that's enough for tonight, as opposed to drinking in the home, where there is no limit on what can be consumed. I believe that the most pubs encourage responsible drinking. That's why I'm in favour of this motion today. When you look at the pub industry in Northern Ireland, the figures are clear. With around some 1,216 pubs in Northern Ireland, and the pub and beer sector alone contributes some £390 million in value added to the economy. Sustains 16,000 jobs, £200 million in wages, and the total tax contribution is £260 million annually. That's some contribution, Minister, from the pubs in Northern Ireland. There is little doubt that this industry makes a key contribution to the supply chain in Northern Ireland, generating the additional jobs and value and wages for the economy. The sector has been in a very precarious trading position over the last few years, and it's demonstrated by the instability of its GVA performance over time, also reflected in the fact that Northern Ireland's pub sector is only one of the 12 UK regions to have experienced negative capital expenditure in 2016. Can't be ignored, that. They contribute 3 times more in business rates than is made profitably in the economy. The business rating approach to pubs in Northern Ireland is based on old case law that determine that pubs are more profitable than other businesses. Valuation is therefore based on an archaic law that no longer has any basis. And I can well understand the argument that as things stand, this sector is paying too much relative to its contribution to the economy. We can demonstrate, I believe, very clearly that it is certainly not more profitable than any other businesses. The differential between Northern Ireland and the rest of the mainland is clear. Figures are here. While the sector contributes some 2% to non-public rates in Northern Ireland, it accounts for just 0.7% of the profitability of the local business economy. While Northern Irish pubs account for just 1.6% of the UK pub sector GVA, pubs contribute 2.5% to UK business rates and 2.5% to the overall direct tax burden for the sector across the United Kingdom. It would seem to me, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this is an overtaxed business as it is, and it was also just not taking into account that with people finding it more and more difficult to make ends meet, the pub beer is something which can be swapped for the home beers, and the mentality of that is I can drink more at home is not what we seek to endorse. So we're trying to make sure that people are retained in the pub, and that's what we're trying to do. While I'm not in favour of a cut to alcohol taxes per se, I do believe that a cut would specifically target our pubs, our bars, hotels and restaurants, and should be considered as a social benefit, surely will outstrip the initial cost. The industry is struggling. My fear is that more local pubs will close. I think it's important that we don't encourage youngsters who are able to chance their arm at a supermarket self-service and never experience the safety measures that come with drinking in a local pub. The tap stops, the keys are removed, and there's no trouble. I fear for a generation who will only experience alcohol as a means to get wasted and not as a social event. And I believe that pubs have a role to play in this, and we need to ensure that they are able to trade and continue to step into people's lives and possibly even save lives. It's about social interaction. It's about drinking sensibly. It's about having pubs in our areas. Thank you.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to take part in this debate, and I congratulate the member for Dudley South and the other members who ensured that this debate took place in the Backbench Business Committee, and also all of those who have contributed to what has been a very good-humoured debate with very little disagreement, I think, that we need to support our local pubs, and we need to ensure that there's taxation regimes that are appropriate to ensure particularly responsible drinking can take place. I want to talk about a few things about Scotland and also some wider points on tax. In Scotland, we've obviously pioneered minimum alcohol pricing, which mostly affects cheap supermarket alcohol, and ensures that those incredibly expensive, incredibly cheap, high alcohol content ciders, for example, that are sold in supermarkets have to be sold at a higher price. But that's not what we would do in an independent Scotland. In an independent Scotland, we would be looking for a comprehensive review of alcohol taxation overall, and in fact we would ask the government to do that, and we did move that in a finance bill previously, because actually I think if you're looking at alcohol taxation, looking at any of the things individually is, in some ways, you can only do that for a few years before you need to do an overall review. And we think that review should be based on the amount of alcohol that is in each of those drinks, and therefore taxation should be levied on an appropriate basis. And just on I know that this debate is about beer and pubs taxation, but in pubs, 42% of the alcohol value that is sold is wines and spirits. So it's also very important that that's considered in any decisions that are being made going forward. And in fact, given that women consume 3 times as much wine as they do beer, it's quite important to consider wine in this context and not just beer. As somebody that likes a pint rather than a glass of wine, I'm on the other side of this argument, but I understand that an awful lot of people are concerned about wine taxation as well. Just on the post-dilution point of view that has been mentioned by a number of members, in fact I'm pleased that the government is bringing forward a review on this. I've been approached by constituents who are keen to see a change in this, and it would be useful if the Minister in his summing up could let us know what's happening about the timescales for that, because I'm not clear on the timescales going forward, although the government may have said that in the past. Just on taxation in general terms, I think there are 3 different reasons that taxation is used. For a start, to generate revenue for the government, also to discourage negative behaviour, and also to encourage positive behaviour, particularly in the case of reliefs. So I think looking at that package, actually the government in assessing taxation on alcohol and pubs needs to think of those 3 things going forward. What does it want to encourage, what does it want to discourage, and how much revenue does it need to generate from any decisions that it's taking? And I think the view around the House is actually that responsible social drinking is the way to go forward, rather than people having to drink at home and choosing to drink incredibly high alcohol volume drinks. Just on business rates, while we're talking about it, in Scotland we've got the most friendly environment for business rates in the UK. We've got 2 out of 5 pubs in Scotland receive the small business bonus, or receive and pay 0 or reduced business rates as a result. And also in Scotland, 90% of properties pay a lower poundage than they would if they were in the rest of the UK. We've done everything that we can to ensure that we've got the most competitive taxation regime for properties. Just a wee bit on the contribution to the economy in Scotland. £1.7 billion contribution to the economy from beer and pubs. And brewing and pub industries support the employment of 60,000 people in Scotland, which is significant. In my constituency, although I don't have the breweries, I do have the first bars for Fierce Beer, for 6 Degrees North, and also for Brewdog. All 3 of those first pubs are in my constituency, although, as I say, the breweries are not there, so it's nice to be able to give them a shout out. So I appreciate the tone in which this debate is taking place. If the Minister could answer my question on the post-dilution point, that would be incredibly useful. And also, if he would commit to a review of alcohol taxation in general, that would be great, but I'm not sure he'll be able to go that far today. Thanks very much.
Annalise Dodds.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd first like to, of course, congratulate the member for Dudley South for securing this debate. As my friend for Coventry South said, this wasn't the first time that we've debated many of these issues, but I very much agree with the member for Aberdeen North that this was a very good-humoured debate, albeit one with rather too many puns, I think, if I may say so. But it was a very, very important debate. As so many members have said, from right across the country, the British and indeed UK pub is renowned around the world since the oldest one was established right back in the 11th century. It's a central feature of our national life, and we've already gone through many of the statistics. I won't do that now, but I very much agree with the member for Ribble Valley that actually much of the economic impact from the pub sector and indeed the brewery sector is indirect as well as direct. We've talked, of course, a lot about the impact on employment, and it was very interesting in particular to hear about the experience from my friend for Heywood in Middleton about her working life. It was also the first taste that I had of working life as well, working in a pub and restaurant, paid the princely sum of £2 an hour before Labour's minimum wage was introduced, I would mention to members and friends. Now, of course, this sector is a very, very important one, supporting around 1 million jobs in the UK. Those who work in that sector, of course, contribute many payroll taxes as well. But also these pubs are really community hubs, as so many members and friends have said. My friend for Ealing West and Acton referred to the role they can play in combating loneliness. And in fact, during this debate, we've heard about how pubs can help older gentlemen. I don't know why I'm gesturing in this direction, but how they are open, of course, to mothers in the run-up to Mother's Day, but also, of course, they're open. I'm very happy to.
On that point of loneliness, we've recently had a consultation in the west of Wales on reconfiguration of health services, and Dr Rhys Thomas, one of the lead consultants, informed us that one of the biggest health challenges we face in terms of public health is loneliness. So there's a public health issue to this as well.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I absolutely agree with the point that was made. And in fact, this is now evidenced. Work has been undertaken, commissioned by CAMRA, which is actually set out quite clearly that there is a positive impact from people using pubs, obviously in the kinds of ways that we've been talking about during this debate. I would also point out the fact that also has been made in this debate that, of course, many people who use pubs aren't necessarily drinking alcohol when they're doing so. They're using them in a whole variety of different ways. And I would mention also the fact that many pubs now, particularly community pubs, a point I'll come back to later, are setting up special sessions for people with different conditions like dementia, for example. So they're very, very important institutions from that point of view. But we have, of course, seen some worrying developments as well, which many members have referred to. We've seen pubs closing at an alarming rate. Last summer, we saw figures showing that 18 pubs a week are closing. Now, those closures, of course, are occurring at the same time as closures in libraries, post offices, banks, many local shops as well. That's happening in rural areas, as was mentioned, but also in urban areas too. And I think my friend for Chesterfield noted very movingly what happens when the last pub moves off an estate, and that was an issue that my friend for Barnsley East also referred to very, very importantly. Now, members from across the House have rightly raised the importance of local pubs, but they've also talked about many of the challenges facing them as well. So I'll talk about those in the time that I have left. First of all, of course, around the tax system, and I'll talk about beer tax, the small brewers relief and business rates as well. We are, I think, in a peculiar situation when it comes to beer tax, and I have to say that I concur with the IFS's assessment that the UK's current system of alcohol excise duties is a mess, and the way we tax our alcohol doesn't necessarily fully correct for the social costs of alcohol either. We really do need to see that longer-term approach, and I hope the Minister is going to spell out the Government's long-range approach to this issue. It's very important, given the developments at EU level that we talked about before. It's also important, I think, given the development of the low-alcohol beer sector too, which was mentioned by the member for Faversham and East Kent and many other members as well. This is very significant now, but we don't yet have a response from the taxation system. And I would mention also in the context of fact that so many different members have pointed to, which is the very corrosive impact of low-quality, high-alcohol products being drunk at home and being cheaper to drink at home a lot of the time. The negative impact that that is having. The member for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross mentioned that, also my friend for North Tyneside and the member for Strangford as well they might, because it's a very, very important issue. Secondly, when it comes to the small brewers relief, I think we had a very interesting discussion around that. My friend for Stoke-on-Trent North talked about the importance of that for small breweries, but I think also we do need to look carefully at the calibration of that relief, given some of the potentially unintended consequences that were mentioned. And I think there were some interesting ideas around that put forward by my friend for Keighley, and I hope they will be taken into account by the review that is currently being undertaken into that relief. I would say, though, despite these kinds of pressures, we're seeing incredible innovation here particularly in the craft brewery sector. And I would just want to also plug the micro pubs movement, which is one that's taken place in my constituency as well, in our amazing covered market too. Finally, when it comes to the tax situation, of course, many members have talked about business rates. To be not too blunt about it, the business rate situation has been incredibly damaging for both pubs, but of course for many other businesses which are based on bricks rather than on clicks, to put it very boldly. I think that my friend from Stoke-on-Trent North put this very, very clearly. She talked about the imbalance there. Many other members also referred to this, that of course with corporation tax you only pay that tax once you are once a business is profitable, and yet the focus from government appears to have been on reducing that corporation tax rate. It's not the approach that would be taken by my party, because we do value high streets and we value those bricks and mortar based businesses. And of course this isn't just something that applies to pubs. My friend for Cardiff West rightly mentioned the impact this is having on music venues as well, and of course they're often the same place as the local pub in practice. We do need to look at these issues in the round, and in fact we should be looking at them in relation to council tax too. That's why we've committed to having a proper review of local taxation. We think that's well overdue now. But of course, just to finish off, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are many other non-tax related impediments facing pubs as well. I think that was a point made very forcefully by my friend for West Bromwich West. In particular, the pubs code that was meant to balance the playing field for small pub tenants hasn't operated in the way that many of us had hoped. There is manipulation of the situation, it appears, and this is immensely problematic because we still have those tenants in subservient relationships to pub companies, as was mentioned by my friend for Leeds North West. This is a big problem for social mobility as well, because it means that people who start off pulling pints can't end up being in that ownership situation. We can't have that social mobility that was mentioned by my friend for Coatbridge, Chryston and Bellshill. I would like to hear from the Minister when the compulsory review into the pubs code is going to be due. I thought it was going to be coming this month. It'd be great to hear exactly when it's going to arrive. And can we please be assured that that process will be open and accountable? We really need to restore trust and accountability to the process. We also, as was mentioned by my friend for Stroud, we also need to make sure that communities are aware of that social value process as well, so that they can take over those community assets when they want to, and many communities aren't aware of them. Now, just finally, in the last few seconds that I have, sadly, many of us have said this is a refuge from Brexit. Sadly, it isn't entirely, of course. First of all, because the workforce is incredibly important to the pub sector. We're all aware, I'm sure, of many of the concerns about what will happen if, in particular, we have a threshold of £30,000 to get workers into the UK. UK Hospitality have said that current proposals are illogical. We need to deal with this challenge. And lastly, the member for Waveney quite rightly referred to the importance of exports from our brewery industry in particular. It's really important that we don't impose any additional bureaucracy on those exporters, particularly in some of those real growth fields and from really innovative parts of our brewing industry. So I hope that the Minister will respond to those issues in his remarks, particularly about the beer tax, small brewers relief, business rates, but also around some of those legal issues as well. Thank you very much.
Mr. Robert Jenrick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Backbench Business Committee for allowing this debate. And as numerous honourable and right honourable members have noted, this did feel rather like finding a good pub on a long walk when you're feeling rather weary and looking for a welcome break. And it has been conducted in a very good-humoured manner throughout this afternoon. When I was first elected at the end of the coalition government, pubs was the only vote, I believe, that the government lost in all those years. So today we are united on this topic. It's just all the other votes that we seem to be losing. Can I thank my honourable friend for Dudley South for sponsoring this debate. He, like the honourable gentleman from West Bromwich West, spoke about the Black Country's long association with beer and brewing. Well, I grew up in the shadow of Banks's brewery in Wolverhampton, and I spent my teenage years, rather like, I think, the honourable lady from Oxford East, working in pubs that his constituents might drive out to in Staffordshire and Shropshire. The Honourable Lady for Stoke North, I thank her also for her contribution this afternoon. I've had a few drinks near her constituency in the Potteries, not least on the night that I lost my first election in 2010. And given the scale of the result, I probably should have drunk a pint from the Titanic brewery. But I don't want to be too negative about what we find today. Actually, there are many great positives about beer and the brewing industry across the United Kingdom, many of which have been heard over the last couple of hours. Not least the flowering of the British craft beer industry, which has brought fresh life to the market. It's created a new generation of entrepreneurs, many of which I know in my own constituency, a former brewing town, Stoke-on-Trent, which has seen several new breweries created in recent years, and given people across the length and breadth of the country unprecedented choice. As we've heard, that word has spread across the world, and exports have risen very significantly. Happy to give way.
Grateful to him for giving way, and he's absolutely right that the small business brewing relief is an example of government forgoing a bit of tax, but actually a huge industry flowering on the back of that. Is that an example he might take for some of his other decisions?
Well, it certainly is, and let me come in a few moments to the relief that he speaks about, which has played a significant part in that, and I believe we can make that better and fit for purpose for the future. Exports have risen now to £500 million a year for beer, and we heard earlier the tremendous results also with respect to Scotch whisky and other spirits. With respect to small brewers' relief, this is the relief that gives the smallest brewers across the country a 50% reduction in duty, and it has helped, as we've heard, to fuel the explosion of local breweries. We now have over 2,000 breweries across the country. At the autumn budget, we announced a review of this relief to give the opportunity for brewers to give their thoughts on a relief which is now 17 years old and hasn't been reviewed systematically over the course of that period. We've opened the review and we've had over 500 responses, which we will now be carefully reviewing and report back on in due course. Our motives at the Treasury have not been to extract more revenue from the sector, certainly not to end the relief, but for, I think, some of the reasons that the Honourable Gentleman from Keighley and others mentioned, that there is some evidence that whilst this relief has been hugely positive in some respects, it has limited growth for some businesses who would like to employ more people, expand, and are concerned by the cliff edge that the relief provides. And I hope that we may be able to, working with breweries, with organisations like SEBA, work through that and do something positive for the industry going forwards. With respect to beer duty, we have taken a number of steps over the course of the last 9 years now to reduce and improve the situation in a country which, as has been widely acknowledged, has high levels of alcohol taxation. We removed the beer escalator. We've either cut or frozen beer duty in 6 of the last 7 fiscal events, so that the duty on a pint is now lower than it was in 2012. In real terms, this long-term and significant action by the government has kept prices low for everyone, and contrasts with the picture for the period from 1997 to 2010, which saw beer duty increase by 60%. Now, this was underlined at the most recent budget with another freeze on beer duty, meaning that the price of a typical pint of beer is now 2p lower than if prices had risen with inflation. I appreciate that there's always more that we could do in this respect. We're also focused on other alcohols, cider, of course, and spirits. We heard from my honourable friend from Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock the importance of spirits to his constituency, as to many others across Scotland, and to the honourable lady from Aberdeen North, as to the importance to the wider Scottish economy. She also asked, I think, 2 other questions of me. Firstly, with respect to post-duty point dilution. Well, we have given this now considerable thought over some time, and we've announced at the budget that we will be bringing this practice to an end from April 2020. She also asked, as did the Honourable Lady for Oxford East, about a wider review of spirits, of alcohol duty more generally. This is a complex area, and there are clearly no easy answers. There are certainly few answers which are fiscally neutral and where there are no losers, which would be important, I'm sure, to many who work or own businesses in this sector. I think perhaps it is premature to conduct a review at this moment because the greatest flexibility in this respect will be available to us after we leave the European Union, and it may then be a choice for a future Chancellor to take action. We also heard from the Honourable Gentleman from Strangford and the Honourable Lady from Faversham with respect to responsible drinking and the question of whether we could lower duty for low alcohol beers. Well, we are somewhat constrained here with respect to EU law. The EU Alcohol Structures Directive sets the maximum threshold for reduced duty on low alcohol beer at 2.8%. HMG charges reduced duty on beer of strength of 1.2 to 2.8% of 6p per pint. Until we leave the EU, we can't raise the threshold for low alcohol beer above 2.8%. But this is something that we will work with our partners across Europe, and of course we could have further flexibility in the years ahead. We have taken action as a government in some specific circumstances with respect, for example, to white cider, and our approach is that we will continue, as necessary, to take action where there is clear evidence that certain alcohol duty rates are causing difficulties for society. Now, we've heard a great deal about pubs, which are, as we heard from numerous colleagues, the bedrock of many communities, both rural and urban, as the Honourable Gentleman from Chesterfield rightly highlighted. They boost the economy, they create jobs, and they act crucially as hubs for our communities. We've heard about their importance for tackling loneliness, the issues for older people, whether older gentlemen, as we heard, or indeed others, and that they are great places for people to work in and to start their careers. Pub industry currently employs around 450,000 people, and many of those are younger people, as has been said.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise as an older gentleman again. But the fact of the matter is, what pubs do for some, imagine some people who are in pretty awful accommodation, bedsit or something like that. The pubs, the local pub, a really nice environment, friendly, warm. This is the sort of place that they can go to. And that's the real advantage, in my view, for pubs locally.
Well, I agree with everything that the Honourable Gentleman has said. Let me speak briefly about business rates, because clearly that's been an important element of this debate, and in the short amount of time I have available, I would like to touch on this. Numerous members, including the Honourable Lady from St Albans, have spoken of this. She brought some of her publicans to see me at the Treasury to discuss this. We've taken a number of actions to support pubs by lowering their tax burden. The most important one, which comes into effect from 1st of April, is that the Chancellor announced at the budget a substantial cut of 1/3 to the business rates bills of small and medium-sized retailers, including pubs, coming into effect this year. That has been set for maximum impact at those retailers, including pubs, with a rateable value of £51,000 or below. I appreciate that that will have less impact in communities like hers, where rateable values are high, but across the whole of the United Kingdom, this means that 90% of those retailers will benefit, and for pubs it'll be between 70 and 85%. For pubs, it will mean a tax saving of up to £8,000 a year. We also previously had the £1,000 discount for small and medium-sized pubs, and many pubs will also benefit from up to 100% small business rates relief, or the 100% rural rate relief, and of course all ratepayers are benefiting from the switch from RPI to CPI. Now, we also had briefly raised by the Honourable Lady, I think from Blaydon, the request that many have, including from the industry, to create a differential rate of beer duty for those drinking in a pub and those purchasing in a supermarket or a convenience store. I can see the strong argument for this, but unfortunately this isn't possible under EU law. Duty is levied on production and not on the place of consumption. But again, this might be something that we could turn to in the future should we have sufficient flexibility. Can I conclude by thanking the Backbench Business Committee, the honourable gentleman and the honourable lady for the superb speeches that they gave today. I think this debate did unify the House and demonstrate the important role that pubs can play in our communities. I will certainly relay the very strong feelings from across the House to my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, with respect to the next budget and the future of beer duty in particular. I think the voice of the House is very clear that it wants, like I think people across the length and breadth of the country, further and continued support for beer, breweries and our important pubs.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank all honourable and right honourable members for their contributions today. We've had well over 20 contributions from members representing 6 out of the 7 parties represented in this House and all 4 nations of our United Kingdom. And the contributions from the Minister, the Shadow Minister and the Honourable Lady for Aberdeen North, the SNP spokesman, showed the breadth of agreement and support for British beer and pubs and the need for us to support them where we can. But if people watching this debate take away just one message, I want that one message to be that British beer and pubs are a force for good. They're a force for good in so many ways. As the honourable members for Heywood and Middleton, for Chesterfield and for Aberdeen North said, they're good for jobs and for local economies. As my honourable friends for Cheadle and St Albans pointed out, they're good for communities and for families. My honourable friend for Ribble Valley said they're good for charities and for community sport. The honourable gentleman for West Bromwich West, they're good for promoting local investment. And the honourable gentleman for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross, they're good for attracting tourism. Yeah. There's also the non-economic benefits, as the honourable lady for Stoke-on-Trent North and the honourable gentleman for Coatbridge, Chryston and Bellshill said. They're essential for helping to tackle loneliness and strengthening social fabric. And the honourable gentleman for Strangford pointed out the vital role that good community and high street pubs play in offering a safe place for responsible drinking. So they are a force for good in so many ways. Think just how much more good they can do if we can get the tax burden under control, give our beer and pubs a fair deal and support these key industries and the role they play in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order paper. As many as that opinion say aye. It was a really good debate. Everybody agreed and lots was achieved. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.